Hello and welcome back to the show. This is a bit of an emergency podcast based on the exciting events that have been happening over the past couple of days. Currently, we are talking about Kyle Rittenhouse, who was involved in a fatal shooting. So what questions did you want to ask, and what did you want clarification on?
Well, clarification, no. Questions, no. To my knowledge, it was 3 white men assaulting him.
Okay. Well, I don't remember, so let's check. So I'm taking a look at the New York Times article. It says, what to know about the trial of Kyle Rittenhouse. Okay, so this was published November 19th, 2021. Mr. Rittenhouse was acquitted on all charges after standing trial in the shootings of 3 men, 2 of whom died in the aftermath of demonstrations in 2020 in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Kyle Rittenhouse, a white 18-year-old from Antioch, Illinois, was acquitted on all charges on November 19th in his trial over the shootings of 3 white men. Yes, you're right. Okay. 2 of whom died in the aftermath of demonstrations in Kenosha, Wisconsin in August of 2020. The jury deliberated for more than 3 days before reaching the verdict. The protests in Kenosha erupted after Rustin Shesky, a white Kenosha police officer, shot and wounded Jacob Blake, a black man. Oh, so it was the police who shot a black guy. Oh, okay. Got it. On August 23rd, 2020. The episode was captured on cell phone video and came only months after the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis set off protests nationally about police abuse of black Americans. Kenosha, a former industrial hub of 100,000 people on the western shore of Lake Michigan, experienced widespread looting, arson, and property destruction on the days after the police shooting. The shootings by Mr. Rittenhouse, which he contends were committed in self-defense, occurred on the 3rd night of the protest. Mr. Rittenhouse faced 6 counts, including homicide charges. 1, a misdemeanor weapons charge, was dismissed near the end of the trial. Mr. Rittenhouse was acquitted on all of the others. Here is what has happened in the case. Who is Kyle Rittenhouse? When the protests over the shooting of Mr. Blake took place, Mr. Rittenhouse was 17 and lived with his mother in Antioch, a small town in Illinois just over the Wisconsin border. Long before the shooting, his social media posts were filled with supporting the police and Blue Lives Matter. Mr. Rittenhouse had also served as a cadet in a program for young, aspiring police officers. He had some ties to Kenosha, despite living in a different state. His father lived in the city, and Mr. Rittenhouse had worked as a lifeguard in Kenosha County. He also kept a military-style semi-automatic rifle in Wisconsin, which the authorities said was purchased for him by a friend. Why was Mr. Rittenhouse in Kenosha? Mr. Rittenhouse had been closely following news of the shooting of Mr. Blake, which occurred when officers arrived at an apartment in response to a domestic complaint and tried to arrest Mr. Blake, who is black. As Mr. Blake, who was holding a knife, tried to climb into an SUV, Officer Shesky, who is white, grabbed him and fired 7 times into his back, leaving him crumpled on the ground.
Yes, the police were hilariously cowardly, weak, and pathetic.
Really? I don't remember very many details of this case. What happened?
I see the police officer just executed a black man.
Okay.
That police officer was weak and pathetic. Next question.
Why do you say that?
Because he executed someone for no reason.
Fair enough. The shooting immediately sparked demonstrations in Kenosha. On the 2nd night of protests, there was widespread destruction in the city's downtown and uptown neighborhood, where several blocks of businesses were looted and burned to the ground.
Nor do I condone violence in retaliation of violence.
Right.
Guys, violence does not help with violence.
No. Let's see. The destruction prompted a response from some people in Kenosha and outside the city who owned guns. They organized on Facebook and vowed to protect the city and assist the police and National Guard members who appeared outnumbered. By the 3rd night of...
Guys, when the National Guard gets called in, stay home. Stay home. The National Guard have better weapons than just about anything you can field.
Yeah, you think?
And they have the authority to use it.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I do not condone violence. You do not need to help the National Guard, you'll just wind up putting them in danger in the attempt. No, protect your own home, defend your own castle, I agree with. But if the city's on fire, unless you're an EMT or unless you're a doctor or unless you're qualified, stay home.
Right. Part of my job is also... Oh, wait. Hold on. I skipped something. By the third night of protests, Mr. Rittenhouse had joined a group of armed men who said they were there to protect businesses. Part of my job is also to protect people, Mr. Rittenhouse said on the evening of the fatal shootings in an interview with the Daily Caller, which is where Ben Shapiro works. Or I think he started it. If someone is hurt, I'm running into harm's way. That's why I have my rifle. I've got to protect myself, obviously, but I also have my med kit. Wisconsin is an open carry state, meaning that people can carry legal firearms in public without a permit unless they are otherwise prohibited from possessing them. But with certain exceptions for hunting, minors are not allowed to carry weapons in public.
I mean, all the more power to you, but again, there's a time and a place.
Right.
Altruism has a time and place. The middle of a war zone is not a time and place for altruism.
Well, and
that's what the professionals are for.
Correct. And there are many ways to help without putting yourself and other people in danger.
Correct.
So, just as a simple example, let's say since Mr. Rittenhouse posted frequently that he was pro-police, pro-Blue Lives Matter, etc., what I would have recommended to him in hindsight would be, well, why don't you do some way to help the victims? So, gather up blankets and plushies for police to give out to people. Like, this is an example of how to help in a difficult situation, how to help diffuse a difficult situation without putting yourself or the members of law enforcement that you are, in principle, trying to help without putting them at risk as well.
Correct. And knowing your laws for lethal force, if you do not know them inside and out, my recommendation is put the gun away.
Correct. By the early evening of Tuesday, August 25th, demonstrations had filled Civic Center Park in Kenosha's downtown, across from heavily barricaded courthouse that was defended by police officers and National Guard members. The night had an unruly feel. Men were driving on motorcycles across the grassy park through groups of protesters. Others had arrived dressed as soldiers, wearing camouflage and carrying rifles with ammunition strapped to their chest. Jesus. The men said they were there as part of Kenosha Militia, self-appointed to protect the city from damage.
Is that how that works now?
So let's just pause there for a second. Just because you have the constitutional right to form a militia, which is sacred in the Constitution, and you also have the constitutional right to carry firearms, especially in a constitutional carry state, does not mean that law enforcement want you showing up to, quote, help with your firearms. Do you think that is going to protect people? Are you dumb?
Yes.
Jesus.
Now, you can have your own militias. There are rules for that, I'm pretty sure.
Very few, because of how strongly it's protected in the Constitution.
Again,
but obviously each state has different regulations on it.
Exactly. I don't know anything about this militia. I don't know if it was just formed on the spot. I don't know anything about it. But I'm willing to bet there's probably some sort of something in the state legislation that indicates what constitutes a militia and what rights a militia has.
Right.
I'm sure there's something.
Exactly. I would certainly hope so. Let's see what else this says. During hours of demonstrations, protesters of the police shooting threw fireworks and water bottles at police officers, who responded with tear gas and rubber bullets. The protesters were eventually driven out of Civic Center Park and down Sheridan Road, one of Kenosha's main thoroughfares with stores, gas station, churches, and a hospital. Most of the protesters had left the area by late evening, but some remained on Sheridan Road, occasionally scuffling and arguing with several dozen people who said they were defending the city. Video taken that night showed Mr. Rittenhouse milling around and offering medical assistance to protesters. Shortly before midnight...
As you should! Thank you, you're helping effectively.
Well, be cautious, because there's more.
I know.
In principle, helping people who need medical attention is generally speaking a good thing, but keep in mind, he was carrying a firearm. So,
True.
Illegally carrying a firearm, by the way, since minors are not allowed to carry in Wisconsin. Let's see. Shortly before midnight, he was chased by Joseph Rosenbaum, who had come downtown that night and joined the crowd into the parking lot of a car dealership. As Mr. Rittenhouse ran into the parking lot, a man nearby fired a handgun into the air. Mr. Rittenhouse turned in the direction of the gunfire as Mr. Rosenbaum lunged at him. Mr. Rittenhouse fired 4 times, shooting Mr. Rosenbaum in the head, the video shows. Mr. Rittenhouse fled down Sheridan Road with at least a dozen members of the crowd in pursuit. One person could be heard in the video yelling, quote, "That's the shooter." At one point, Mr. Rittenhouse tripped and fell, then shot at 2 more people who were chasing him. Anthony Huber, who was killed, and Gage Groskwitz, who was shot in the arm but survived. Mr. Rittenhouse walked toward police vehicles with his arms raised, but they drove past him, trying to reach the people who had been shot.
Then just keep walking at that point. You'll be fine.
Jesus. I don't know about that. So, I think that is a good amount of information to think over. There's more, so if we want to do a follow-up later, we can.
Oh, yes.
But, what are your thoughts?
My thoughts are, it basically played out how the court case played out, which I listened to the court case live when it happened.
Mm-hmm.
So, this is just a refresher.
Right. Well, and again, it is not bad to defend yourself, but it seems to me like going to a active, protest, going to a place of civil unrest, carrying a gun illegally as a minor seems like a bad idea to me.
Correct. Now, if, for example, we are journalists, we get into weird circumstances all the time.
Right.
We know the laws around firearms when it's necessary.
Right.
Depends on exactly what situation we're getting ourselves into.
Correct. Well, and as we spoke about on a previous podcast, or it was a recording that we made while we were talking to the officer, one of the things that we did was we had the airsoft gun. Remember? We had the airsoft pistol.
Yeah.
And what we did was we put it inside of a box, and we before we did anything with the police, we showed the box to the officer, and we said, there is a firearm in this box. It is an airsoft firearm. It just looks realistic. So we want to make sure that you know that it's there, so there's no surprises.
Yeah.
And they said, well, as long as you keep the box sealed, then we don't have to look at it. We don't have to get, any type of issue over
We
it.
get in weird circumstances all the damn time.
Right. But that's just an example of a way that you can have, it wasn't a pistol, but it was a firearm, quote unquote. There's a way that you can have one there, speak to the police peacefully, and not have any issues come up. That's only one example, but that's the way that we handled it.
Correct.
So,
it's bedtime.
Yes. So, like I said on my page, I've invited Mr. Rittenhouse to come onto the program, airing on WWPR Tampa Bay, and we would be interested in interviewing him and hearing his side of the story.